The following presentation was delivered at the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange in late August 2018, and I would like to thank the CCTX for inviting me in to talk about the NIST cybersecurity framework. During this presentation, we're going to cover a number of different topics, including a brief introduction, the NIST cybersecurity framework updates that were released in April of this year for version 1.1. We're also going to talk about special publication SP 800-54 and also SP 800-171. We're going to talk about the implementation tiers, the implementation strategy, additional considerations, and concluding remarks. This is my introduction. Welcome to the presentation. I have 29 years of experience in IMIT. My name is Bernhard. Most of my training came at IBM Big Blue, where I also worked for 2 years on the red team, attacking offshore assets. I've also taught in college as a professor of applied science in systems engineering. I have over 800,000 shares in 147 countries, and I have multiple certifications. My experience spans 12 of 16 critical infrastructures, including the majority of that in the financial services area, as well as government, manufacturing of food, technology, clothing, logistics, and distribution, as well as telecom, nanotech, also pharmaceutical, legal services, and in the healthcare sector. In 2017, I created this mind map. Covers a number of different areas that I think are critical to any enterprise security program, including risk management, enterprise security architecture, monitoring communications, program management, knowledge management, governance, and integration. It's available at my website. The link is below if you're interested in downloading it as a PDF. Let's move into the main topic here. We're talking about framework controls. On the left is a control framework matrix that I've created by summarizing the NIST cybersecurity framework, which covers 5 domains: identify, protect, respond, detect, recover. There are 5 domains, 23 subsections, and 108 control points. And on the right is a beautiful reference model that I use to talk about the cybersecurity framework. As many of you probably know, the NIST cybersecurity framework came from NIST as the organization that creates standards for the federal government. It's also related to FISMA, which is actually a law, and that actually references NIST Act, which is also a law, and from that, NIST is empowered to create standards like the Special Publication 800-53 R4 and also the NIST cybersecurity framework. So these are legal obligations that companies in the critical infrastructure must follow. The NIST Special Publication 800-53 Revision 4 is soon going to be replaced by -5, which includes a brand new program management section, which I'm really excited about because this is the first time that NIST has had a program standard, and it's really cool, but it's very serious too. We'll talk about it later. In risk management, we often talk about context around the organization and the legal obligations that drive some of the operational procedures. FISMA Act drives NIST Act, which drives the creation of standards like NIST SP 800-53 R4 and also FIPS 200 and FIPS 199. These are legal obligations that businesses must follow. Within FISMA, it defines 3 principles that kind of guide all the rest of the work that it does. Those are based on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These are the principles of information security. And it's nice to see an act that actually recognizes the fact that information is a separate entity from information systems. So it separates technology security from information security. FISMA is a good legal act. FIPS 199, Classified Information and Systems, is based on worst case scenario, and it assesses the impact to the business based on the impact to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. NIST Special Publication 800-53-4 covers a number of controls. As you can see in this control matrix, it summarizes 909 control points that cover access control, awareness and training, audit and accountability, security assessment and authorization, configuration management, contingency planning, identification and authentication, incident response, maintenance controls, media protection controls, physical and environmental protection controls, planning controls, personal security controls, risk assessment controls, also system and service acquisition controls, system and communication protection controls, system and information integrity controls. On this slide, I've presented two control matrices. One is for the NIST Special Publication 800-171 Revision 1, just recently released, for the protection of controlled unclassified information in non-federal information systems and organizations. And it's mapped to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework Version 1, Release 1. As you can see at the bottom, both control frameworks have very similar control numbers. The 171, if you look at the subtopics within it, looks very much like the typical information security framework, covering access control, awareness and training, audit, accountability, configuration management, identification, authentication, incident response, maintenance, media protection, personnel security, physical security, risk assessments, security and communications protection, and systems and information integrity. On the right, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework covers 5 domains. Under Identify, we have asset management, business environment, governance, risk assessment, risk management strategy, supply chain management, which is new. And under Protect, we have identity management, authentication, access control, awareness and training, data security, information protection, processes and procedures, maintenance, and protective technology. Under Detect, we have anomalies and events, security, continuous monitoring, detection processes. Under Respond, we have response planning, communication analysis, mitigation, and improvements. And under Recovery, we have recovery planning, improvements, and communication planning. I hope that you're not getting tired of the legal obligation angle, because it is important. Of the 5 general areas within enterprise risk management, compliance management is one of the biggest concerns for senior managers. Recently in the U.S., they created a new security standard for federal systems that helps to protect the cloud, and it's called FedRAMP. You may have already heard of it, but if you haven't, you should look it up and research it a bit. FedRAMP refers to FISMA. FISMA refers to NIST. And NIST, of course, has a number of standards that need to be applied, including 800-53-4, FIPS 200, and FIPS 199. Next, we're going to be talking about NIST Cybersecurity Framework 1.1 and the changes that have happened. The domains that have not been affected by these changes include detection and recovery. Supply chain is a net new set of controls that have been added under Identify, and we're going to talk about this more. There are 5 new controls added to Identify under ID.SC for supply chain management. They include SC1, cyber supply chain risk management processes are identified, established, assessed, managed, and agreed to by organizational stakeholders. Number 2, SC2, suppliers and third-party partners of information systems, components, and services are identified, prioritized, and assessed using a cyber supply chain risk management process. Number 3, SC3, contracts with suppliers and third-party partners are used to implement appropriate measures designed to meet the objectives of the organization's cybersecurity program and cyber supply chain risk management plan. SC4, suppliers and third-party partners are routinely assessed using audits, test results, or other forms of evaluations to confirm they are meeting their contractual obligations. SC5, response and recovery planning and testing are conducted with suppliers and third-party providers. I can tell you that based on my own experience as a manager of assessment and compliance reporting with BC government, I had over 19 ministries to regularly assess compliance with the information security standard. It was an automated process eventually, but not at the beginning. Also, as the director for the Morgan Stanley security program on behalf of NTT, we use security architecture as a way to assess compliance. And when I worked with IBM on the red team, our form of compliance assessment was to do ethical hacking against the other companies to ensure that their security standards were up to par, even though they may have said they were. The next set of updates affects the domain protect and identity management and authentication. Under the domain protect in the subsection, identity management, authentication, and access control, PRAC, there are two new controls. AC6, identities are proofed and bound to credentials and asserted to in interactions. AC7, users' devices and other assets are authenticated. Single-factor authentication, multiple-factor authentication, commensurate with the risk of the interaction. A little later on, we're going to talk about the 4 tiers used during the implementation of NIST cybersecurity framework. But based on the controls that we're seeing here, we're looking at a high level of maturity required by the organization. They need to implement an IDIM, which is an automated system, and also a NAC. The next control that's added is under Data Security, PRDS. It's PRDS-8. Integrity checking mechanisms are used to verify hardware integrity. It requires a high level of maturity within your infrastructure and your architecture of your network in order to be able to verify the integrity of devices. It's an automated function. It would be like a level 5 on a maturity model. The next control, new control, is under Protective Technology, PR.PT, and it's PR.PT-5. Mechanisms such as fail-safes, load balancers, hot swappable devices are implemented to achieve resilience requirements in normal and adverse situations. Most networks today that are modern already have these devices in place. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit to give you a little context, and we're going to look under the domain protect, PR, and just to see what other controls are in there that AC-6 were added to and AC-7. PRAC-1 talks about identities and credentials are issued, managed, and verified and revoked and audited for authorized devices, users, and processes. This is talking about devices as in NACs and people as in identity and access management. Those are the type of controls required here. Number 2, PR.AC-2, physical access to assets is managed and protected. This normally happens when you have a physical security plan in process, but you also need to have an asset management process. Number 3, remote access is managed. This is not something that's new to most of us, as most people work from remote now. Number 4, PR.AC-4, access permissions are managed, incorporating the principles of least privilege and separation of duties. This requires security architecture and planning in advance. The next one is PR.AC-5, network integrity is protected, incorporating network segmentation where appropriate. Again, security architecture is required, likely a risk assessment that drove the security changes in the architecture or segmentation. A lot of planning has to go into this. The integrity of the network can be automated to a degree, but the segmentation is a security architecture role for sure. So then we get back to the 2 new controls, PRAC-6 and PRAC-7. And now that you know that identity management has already been mentioned, as well as integrity checking within the network, the fact that you're going to be doing proofing of credentials as asserted by interactions, and also checking user assets to make sure that they should be assigned, these aren't really big leaps forward in the standard. Now we're going to look at the changes under Protect PR and under Data Security, the subsection PR.DS. You can see that one new control, PRDS-8, integrity checking mechanisms, was added to the very bottom. However, before that was added, we already had PRDS1, data at rest is protected, PRDS-2, data in transit is protected. These are talking about adding encryption to your network and your disks. PRDS-3, assets are formally managed throughout removal, transfer, and disposition. This is about the life cycle of assets. You need an asset management system in order to automate this process. PR.DS-4, adequate capacity to ensure availability is maintained. This obviously ties into the cloud and the elasticity of the cloud, but also into formal capacity management, which comes from the ITIL world. Actually, it's been around for over 2 decades already. Nothing new. Next is PRDS-5, protections against data leaks are implemented. This is endpoint protection. Some organizations already have this in place. This is another layer of control that probably fits very nicely with the NAC and your IDEM. PR.DS-6, integrity checking mechanisms are used to verify software, firmware, and information integrity, and this is more important now with the type of threats as they become more sophisticated. Finally, PR.DS-7, the development and testing environments are separated from the production environment. This ties into segmentation within the networks, and it's something that we've been trying to practice for a very, very, very long time. Now you have the context for the new control, PR.DS-8. Integrity checking mechanisms are used to verify hardware integrity. Not a huge leap now that you have IDEM and a NAC in place. This can be done easily. Now we're going to look at the last control in this section under Protect. Protective Technology, PR.PT subsection. Under PR.PT-1, we have audit log records are determined, documented, implemented, and reviewed in accordance with the policy. Under PR.PT-2, we have removable media is protected and its use restricted in accordance with the policies. Under PR.PT-3, the principle of least functionality is incorporated by configuring systems to provide only essential capabilities. This is a security architecture and design solution that we've been doing for a long time to restrict user access. The next control is PR.PT-4, communications and control networks are protected. And this is something that's probably already been addressed because if you recall earlier we talked about encrypting communication channels to ensure that the data flow is protected. Now you have the context for the new control, PR.PT-5. Mechanisms, e.g. fail-safes, load balancing, hot swappable, are implemented to achieve resilience requirements in normal and adverse situations. This is nothing new. Most modern networks already have this stuff in place or they wouldn't operate properly. The next new control area we're going to talk about is under the domain response and under the subtopic analysis. The new control is RS.AN-5. Processes are established to receive, analyze, and respond to vulnerabilities disclosed to the organization from internal or external sources. This ties into public and private partnerships as well as threat intelligence. Very smart control to have. Now let's add a little context to that new control insertion. Under the subtopic analysis RS.AN, we have RS.AN1. Notifications from detection systems are investigated. Under RS.AN-2, the impact of an incident is understood. And under RS.AN-3, forensics are performed. And under RS.AN4, incidents are categorized consistent with response plans. This section definitely touches on a lot of the points within an incident handling process, from monitoring and notifications to taking action, including forensics. And now they are adding the integration with threat intelligence systems external to the organization, and as well there will be shared outbound threat intelligence as part of the public and private partnerships program. The next topic we're going to talk about are implementation tiers as defined by NIST cybersecurity framework. At first glance, the NIST cybersecurity framework tier structure looks like a maturity table. The table has 4 tiers. Adaptive at the top, below that repeatable, Tier 2 is risk informed, and Tier 1 is partial. This table, however, has a very specific focus, as you can see across the top of the columns. It talks about the risk management process, integrated risk management program, and external participation. This star chart is a good visual tool to use to demonstrate the levels of maturity within the process and the tier. Tier 4 for the risk management process includes the organization adapts to cybersecurity practices. Under Tier 3 in column Integrated Risk Management Program, the goal here is there is an organization-wide approach to managing cybersecurity risk. Under external participation in column 3, across to Tier 2, risk informed, the organization understands its role in the larger ecosystem. Now, what does that say to you? For me, working in both government and the commercial sector, this chart looks a lot like it's specifically geared toward the government, because government ministries and entities within the government have codependencies, both upstream and downstream, and knowing your place in that stream would be important to a government agency. Now we're going to add a little context to the discussion. I'm going to review the upper end of each tier and the lower end, and the first one that we're going to look at is risk management. So under tier level 1 partial risk management process, the organizational cybersecurity risk management practices are not formalized, and risk is managed in an ad hoc, sometimes reactive manner. Prioritization of cybersecurity activities may not be directly informed by organizational risk objectives, the threat environment, or business mission requirements. Now we're going to look at the upper end, Tier 4 adaptive risk management process. The organization adapts its cybersecurity practices based on previous and current cybersecurity activities, including lessons learned and predictive indicators or analytics. Through a process of continuous improvement incorporating advanced cybersecurity technologies and practice, the organization actively adapts to a changing threat and technology landscape and responds in a timely and effective manner to evolving and sophisticated threats. From a capability and maturity model, this sounds perfectly normal, but it would be applied to all practices, not specifically just risk management. So this is very focused and targeted for a specific reason. Now we're going to put some context around the middle tier called Integrated Risk Management Program. Under Tier 1 Partial Integrated Risk Management Program, there is limited awareness of cybersecurity risk at the organizational level. The organization implements cybersecurity risk management on an irregular, case-by-case basis due to varied experience or information gained from outside sources. The organization may not have processes that enable cybersecurity information to be shared within the organization. We haven't even gotten to the higher level, Tier 4, in the middle column under Integrated Risk Management Program, and you can see that the emphasis on public and private partnerships or sharing threat intelligence information within the government and the ministries is at the top of the priority list. Under Tier 4, Adaptive, with the Integrated Risk Management Program, there is an organization-wide approach to managing cybersecurity risks that uses risk-informed policies, processes, and procedures to address potential cybersecurity events. The relationship between cybersecurity risk and organizational objectives is clearly understood and considered when making decisions. Senior executives monitor cybersecurity risk in the same context as financial risk and other organizational risks. The organizational budget is based on an understanding of the current and predicted risk environment and risk tolerance. Business units implement executive vision and analyze system-level risks in the context of the organizational risk. Cybersecurity risk management is part of the organizational culture and evolves from an awareness of previous activities and continuous awareness of activities on their systems and networks. The organization can quickly and efficiently account for changes to business mission objectives in how risk is approached and communicated. So far, the first two columns have really hit the nail on the head when it comes to risk management and its importance within every organization as a decision tool and a communication tool. Now let's move on to external participation and Tier 1, partial. External participation. The organization does not understand its role in the larger ecosystem with respect to either its dependencies or dependents. The organization does not collaborate or receive information, i.e., or e.g. rather, threat intelligence, best practices, technologies from other entities, e.g. buyers, suppliers, dependencies, dependents, ISOs, researchers, governments, nor does it share information. The organization is generally unaware of the cyber supply chain risks of the products or services it provides and that it uses. Moving along to Tier 4, adaptive. External participation. The organization understands its role, dependencies, and dependence in the larger ecosystem and contributes to the community's broader understanding of risks. It receives and generates and reviews prioritized information that informs continuous analysis of its risks as the threats and technology landscape evolve. The organization shares that information internally and externally with other collaborators. The organization uses real-time or near real-time information to understand and constantly act upon cyber supply chain risks associated with the products and services it provides and that it uses. Additionally, it communicates proactively using, e.g., agreements and informal mechanisms to develop and maintain strong supply chain relationships. By now, you can probably see that this is not a capability and maturity model or chart. It's in fact very focused on risk management and public and private relationships only. This approach is going to be problematic because an enterprise cybersecurity program consists of at least 12 different processes, including governance and vulnerability management and continual improvement, a number of things that are not even touched on here. So the focus is very narrow. Normally, in a capability and maturity model, if you look at the green line as it goes from the top left to the bottom right, it reduces unplanned incidents or defects and of course the expenses that go along with it. And the blue line, in contrast, adds to the stabilization as you adopt new practices and set higher standards, and the organization matures. Now on this slide, I've pulled one control from each of the 5 domains just to talk about the level of maturity that the NIST cybersecurity framework is expecting to get out of organizations. And it might be easy for the government to use taxpayer dollars to provide the funding for their infrastructure, but in the commercial sector things work a little bit differently, and this is considered to be an investment or a risk mitigation activity, kind of like buying insurance. So the first control, ID.AM-1, talks about physical devices and systems within the organization are inventoried. This is not a simple routine matter for most organizations. Having an inventory of your physical devices is a good idea. It's actually a good risk mitigation activity. It's smart, in fact. If you have adopted ITIL and you have a configuration management database, you probably already have a list of your physical assets because they get purchased and inventoried and they get configured and changed, and you probably have some rather detailed records about it. So it's a good thing to have for sure. The next control we're going to talk about is PR.AC-1. Identities and credentials are issued, managed, verified, revoked, and audited for authorized devices, users, and processes. We're talking about an IDAM and an NAC here. And these are pieces of software that cost money. They have maintenance agreements, and they also require the dedication of a user who's going to manage and oversee and maintain the records, not to mention the integration with various departments, including human resources. Again, this is a great idea if you can afford it and if you have the funding to do it and you can justify it from a risk management perspective. The next control we're going to look at is DE.AE-1, a baseline of network operations and expected data flows for users and systems is established and managed. And this should be happening if you have a capacity management process where you're monitoring the volume of traffic in your network and addressing any sort of incidents or problems that arise due to thrashing or a throughput restriction, things like that that raise red flags. However, like the other two controls that we talked about, this requires a higher level of maturity within the organization. This is not a small mom and pop shop doing this. This is a mid-level enterprise or above. The next control we're going to talk about is RS.RP-1. Response plan is executed during or after an event, which is kind of an odd control the way they phrase that, because if you have a response plan, it's part of your incident handling process, and usually it's happening as the incident response process is happening. In any regard, this requires, again, a higher level of maturity within your organization. It's above a level 3. It's at least a level 4, maybe a level 5 on the capability chart. Finally, the fifth control that I'm going to talk about is RC.RP-1. Recovery plan is executed during or after a cybersecurity incident. A response plan is great if you have a formal incident management plan, and especially if you have developed a playbook. But these things are the type of tools that you need to invest in and you need to pay money for. And most organizations may see this type of risk exposure as part of doing business, so they're probably not going to invest in it if they're small. Most formal security or cybersecurity programs take 3 years to mature. They don't happen overnight, and they don't happen in a few months and not a year. But as you can see, the NIST cybersecurity framework has been pushing organizations to immediately get up to speed and implement a program. And you can tell by the curve it's quite a bit different than the others. However, it was initiated in 2014 and it's 2018 now. There are undoubtedly thousands of businesses that are not even scratching the surface on the NIST CSF. The next topic and the last topic we're going to talk about is the implementation strategy as defined by NIST CSF. NIST recommends a 7-step process. First step, prioritize and scope. Second step, orient. Third step, create a current profile. Fourth step, conduct a risk assessment. Fifth step, create a target profile. This is where the star chart would come in handy, actually, and those 3 columns that we talked about for risk management and integrated risk management. Step 6, determine, analyze, and prioritize gaps. Step 7, implement an action plan. Sounds pretty straightforward. Now let's compare that implementation strategy to one that we would recommend at Secure Knowledge Management. At Secure Knowledge Management, we don't theorize about this sort of stuff. We actually do it for a living. So here's our approach, and it's a 10-step approach, okay? So we talk about establishing a scope, whether it's narrow or wide. Narrow would help you get quick wins, improve, the confidence of the management team so that you could take on more of the implementation process. You got to create a conformity matrix. You got to map all the current processes and the process gaps so that you know what to address and prioritize. You got to create a list of assets, whether it's a formal system or whether it's just an Excel spreadsheet. You need to do that. You also need to understand the context of the organization and create a list of all the legal obligations that the organization has to comply with. The next step is step 5, create, document, and record registry. You need to know what documentation needs to be captured and controlled. You also need to know what records need to be kept as part of the evidence, or perhaps it facilitates the process, such as incident management or investigations. Step 6, conduct a risk assessment and take on a risk treatment plan. So from the risk assessment come risks that need to be treated. So how are you going to do that? You need to have a governance committee already in place as well. Step 7, create and execute a communication strategy. In our opinion, half the solution requires at least 30% of your time in order to properly develop communications and share it with your staff in order to move the process along and mature it for the organization. Step 8, establish an internal audit process, because you need somebody who's independent from the cybersecurity program to be able to verify and validate what you're doing, again, to add some assurance to the senior management team that you're on the right track and that you're not just wasting time or disrupting the culture. Step 9, establish performance metrics so that the governance committee can again monitor the performance of the cybersecurity program and respond to any sort of situations that might rise where they need to jump in and help out. Finally, step 10, if you're coming in as a consultant and helping an organization, it's time to close the project and hand over the reins of the program. This requires knowledge transfer of operational control, and you need to understand what type of knowledge needs to be transferred in order to empower the management team to take over once you leave. And as we wind down this presentation, we're going to talk about additional considerations. Special Publication 800-171 for controlled unclassified information and non-federal information systems and organizations is not just a standard for U.S. companies. It's also a standard for companies that manufacture parts for U.S. government. I am not a big fan of PCI, but I did come across PCI CPP when doing a project, and it's an excellent example of the integration between logical security and physical security in case you're thinking of combining those two areas. 1,287 control points. Very well done. Where would I be if I didn't mention Old Faithful ISO 27001 matrix? Includes management controls, 148 mandatory controls, and then a number of discretionary controls, 113 discretionary controls that can be risk justified in or out of scope. It is the world's #1 information security framework. Of course, we've already gone over the framework matrix on the right hand side. It does push maturity fast and hard. It's the NIST cybersecurity framework. Look at the control number totals, 108 control points versus the 261 with ISO. Big difference is, though, there's no management system clearly defined in the NIST cybersecurity framework. Again, you can compare ISO 27001 to the NIST Special Publication 800-53-4. Very different standards. You can see ISO 27001 covers mandatory and discretionary controls, 261 is the total, while 800-53-4 covers 909. And there's probably going to be a lot more controls coming out in the next release, which is due very soon. That will be 800-53 revision 5. How can secure knowledge management help you with your cybersecurity program? Well, with all my experience, I had a vision for a company, and that's why I started Secure Knowledge Management Incorporated. Not just any kind of company, but a security company that would help the middle to small size businesses. Now, in this vision, I see 4 buckets of services that we can possibly provide to small business. First of all, we can help the individuals get certified. We can also help businesses get certified. And then secondly, there are people who want to do it themselves. So we can provide all the materials, such as some of the ones that we discussed in this presentation. Also, there are some people who are just seeking expertise, and they want someone who's been there and done that and has the t-shirt. So we're definitely the people. And then finally, there are some people who can't do it themselves. They need to outsource the CISO role or the security manager role, or they need to outsource the internal audit or the monitoring role for the Security Operations Center. And we can help with all of those things. Just visit us on our website and drop us a line if you have a question. I want to thank the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange operation for inviting me in to have this discussion with its members and allowing me to share this video with you over the internet. Thank you very much. My contact information is listed here if you'd like to contact me directly if you have any questions. If you are interested in some of the standards or the legal obligations that I discussed during my presentation, I've added them to the last slide so that you can copy them down or research them further. Thank you for your time and thank you for coming.